Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. In today's video, we are going to take a step back from the 3D in Construct 3 and do something a little more 2D, and I'll show you what we have. So this is a menu, not a whole lot of art going on. This is just to serve as an example, and I'm using my left and right arrow keys. I can shift the menu to different options by using the arrow keys, and it actually works pretty well, and it gives this kind of 3D depth look to it, where our front option is in full color with a blinking selection frame around it, and our other two options sit in the background grayed out. And then when we move the carousel, we change the Z depth of each menu selection. So it's not that hard, but it does have some fine details in it to make it work as smooth as it does. Thank you for checking out this video today. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, please hit that big red button, check that bell, and hit a thumbs up for me. That helps out people like myself here on YouTube. And as always, I appreciate any support. I have a few of these different menu types in mind, and I'm going to start with this carousel type of menu selection screen. So another note before we get started is at the time of this recording, I'm pretty sure Construct 3 still has a free version available. And if you want to follow along just to create this project, it is under the 50 event limit. We're only going to use 2 layers, so we should be well within the limits for the free version if you want to get some practice in and see what this game engine can do. All right, let's go ahead up here at the top and click New. And I'm just going to call this Carousel Menu. And I'm going to leave it at the default 16 by 9, 854 by 480 viewport size. You can turn on Optimize for pixel art if you want. Let's go ahead and create a project. And over in the properties, we have under display, we have the viewport size. And I'm going to click in that box, highlight it, Control C to copy, and then click anywhere on the layout. And we come up here to the layout size, highlight that, Control V to paste, and then click. And now we have a layout size the same size as our viewport. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of objects to create here, but we do have a couple. So I'm going to go ahead and double click anywhere on the layout and scroll down and get a sprite object. Insert that, and we can click to insert it wherever. And then I'll go up here and change the size from 250 by 250 to 128 by 128. And then I'm going to get my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to create a green color. You can make yours whatever color you want. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to go with these properties in the HSL tab, hue, saturation, and illumination, 125, 25, 55. And then with the paint bucket tool selected, I'm just going to fill the square. And then I'll come down here to our frames and right click and duplicate. And then right click and duplicate once more, and then select this first frame, and I'm going to grab the pencil tool and a solid black color, and then I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and I'm just going to write in the name for the menu, the selection. Instead of using a text object that would get a little more involved, it wouldn't be that hard. I want to make this as simple and as quick as possible. So I'm going to manually, with my mouse, draw in the word play. Just like that. It looks very ugly, and that's cool. And then down here, I'm very small, going to write new game. Okay, it doesn't have to be pretty. And actually, since I already have this play written out like that, I'm going to right click on that and duplicate that one. And then we can come to one of these blank ones, right click, and just delete it, because we're only going to have 3 selections. So on the second frame, which is frame 1, because it starts with frame 0. So on frame 1, I am going to get the eyedropper tool and get this green color back, and then get my paint bucket tool and just get rid of new game. Then I'll go grab the pencil tool again, get a solid black color, and then I'm going to write in continue game. Again, not very pretty. We just need something to visually see what's going on screen. Let's click that last frame, and I'm going to write in the word settings. So next, I'm actually going to give this a frame of its own. So I'm going to get an orange color and I'll just type it in of what I have in my original project in the HSL tab. I'll go 28 for the hue, 100 for the saturation, and 40 for the luminance. Get the square or rectangle tool, and I'm going to check border, uncheck fill, and a border thickness of 3. And I will start in the very top corner and click and drag out to the very bottom corner and give myself a frame. And then I'll go to one of the other frames and do the same thing. And then the last frame. There is my fantastic art skills at work. And one more thing I want to do before we get out of the animation editor here is I want to make note of the number of the frames. We have 3 frames, but it starts at 0, so we have 0, 1, 2. I'm going to need to reference the animation frames later on in our code more than once. And we could make up for that in the code by adding or subtracting a number to the frame, the number of the frame. But we can avoid all that by creating a blank frame for the 0 position. So I'm going to do that down here in the frames panel. I'm going to right click and add frame. And it adds a blank frame here. I'm going to click on it and drag it to the front. So now frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3 are in those respective numbers. This will make even more sense once we get into the code. So with that done, I'm going to exit out. With it selected, I'm going to click in the name properties and I'm going to rename this menu box. And it does not have anything in it. In fact, if I click off to the side, it looks like it disappears, but it is in fact still there. And that's because when we have it selected, if we scroll down to the bottom of the properties, we have initial animation and animation 1, which it only has the one animation, but then it says initial frame and it's sitting on 0, which the 0 frame was the empty frame. If I change that to 1, then it would look like that. And I'm glad I did that because it looks like I have forgotten to do something. So I'm going to double click to go back into this. And with any frame selected, let's go to the image point tool. And I want to make sure that it is in the center. Right now we can see it's at the bottom right. I want it in the center. And we can either put it at 64 by 64 up in the X and Y, or if you have a numpad on your keyboard, you can hit 5 and it'll go straight to the center. So once that is in the center, come over here to the origin and right click on it and apply to whole animation. So now frame 0, 1, 2, and 3, it's in the middle of all of them. Okay, I'm going to exit out and you see it repositioned itself and now it has that little blue dot in the middle. It shows us where the origin point is and we can change the initial frame to any frame we want. So I'm going to just set it at 1 just so we can see it on screen. We're actually going to get rid of this here in a minute. But before we do that, let's go over to the layers panel and we have a layer called layer 0 and I'm going to click on it and come over to the properties and I'm just going to rename this to menu boxes. Okay, and back over in the layers panel, I'm going to right click in a blank space, add a layer to bottom, and I'm going to call this one background. Now, if we go back up to the menu boxes layer, highlight that, and we come over to the properties down here in appearance, transparent is unchecked. That means this background color, this gray color, this light gray color is going to show as a solid background. I want this layer to be transparent, so let's check transparent, and you see it goes away. And then if we go to our background layer, highlight that, it is by default every layer created after the first layer, the transparent box is checked. Well, I'm going to uncheck it because I want to create a solid background color on the background layer. And unfortunately, it gives us this dull light gray color. I'm going to change that though. So we can click on here and we can choose a color if you want. I want a nice dark bluish color. And I'm actually going to type this in. I'm going to go 35, 38, 52. And that's going to give me this really dark blue color. And I'm doing that so that I get a nice contrast of our lighter colored menu box object. Okay, we are going to create this in our code so we don't need it here. Make sure it's highlighted and we're going to hit the delete key. And it tells us that we deleted the last instance of that object. That's fine. We're going to recreate it. Let's go over to the event sheet And now we'll start entering some code. So let's start off by adding an event, and let's go into the system, and I'm going to type in start on start of layout. That's the one we want. Insert that. And when the game starts, on the start of that layout, we want to create all of our boxes. So we could go and add an action. And if we went into system, we could go to create object. And we would have to do that 3 times because I want to create the 3 selections that we created in our sprite. But there's a much easier way of doing that, and that is by using a loop. So let's highlight this whole block of code, and I am going to hit B to create a sub-event. And if we double click to go into that sub-event, we can go back into system, and I'm going to type in for, F-O-R, and I want the for loop. You can give it a name if you want, but we're not going to be referencing the name in this particular project, so I'm going to leave mine blank, and I want to start it from 1 to 3 because we have 3 that we're going to create. And then I'll hit done. So each time this loop runs, I want it to create a new box. So let's add an action, go into system, and now we can go get that create object. And we'll click to choose the menu box. And the layer is going to be that menu boxes layer. And for the sake of this project, I'm just going to put this all in the center of the screen. The X value is going to be the layout width. And I'm going to divide that by 2. That'll put us right in the middle for the X value, left to right. And then for the Y value, the top to bottom, we'll do layout height divided by 2. And if we play this, we get nothing. It is actually there, but it's sitting on that first frame, which is the 0 frame. So if I run debug layout, we can go into menu box. You see there's 3 of them created, and they're all right there. It's just that every single one of them is on the current frame of 0. Okay, so one of the things I want to go ahead and start taking care of is this layout width divided by 2 puts it on the X value of right in the middle of the screen. I'm going to need to reference that position later on in the game. In fact, if we go over to the layout just for a second, I'm going to drag another box in here. I'm going to want 3 of these boxes, so there'll be 3 of them, and I want to create them all and position them in certain spots. And then we're going to rotate them, and they're going to need to move to each other's spots, depending on which arrow key we use. So to do that, we're going to reference some positions that are preset. Okay, I'm going to delete all these and go back to the event sheet. And I'm going to create some variables that will give us all the positions that we need. So I'm going to right click in an empty space and add global variable. And I'm going to call this POS for position underscore, and I'll do left, hit enter, and then right click, add a variable, POS underscore center. And let's do it again. And I'll call this one POS underscore right. So on our layout, we know that the size is 854 from left to right and 480 from top to bottom. To get the very center, we would just divide 854 by 2. So back on the event sheet, let's go to our POS center, double click to go into it, and I want to change the value to 854 divided by 2, which is 427. Once I place an object in the center, I want the others to be, I'm going to say 100 pixels offset to the left and 100 pixels offset to the right. From the center, position left will be minus 100 pixels. That will be 327. And then from the center, 100 pixels to the right, we'll add 100 pixels. So that'll be 527. So now we have 3 variables that we can reference as many times as we need to throughout our code. And one of those places we can reference it is right in this object that we created. So let's go into that, and instead of layout width divided by 2, I'm just going to enter the POS center variable. We can leave the height, the layout height divided by 2, because I'm not going to create a variable for that one. Okay, let's give our menu box animation frames some values so that they show up on the right frame once they're created. So when we run this loop, then I want to start setting up those values. So with this loop event selected, the entire thing highlighted, let's press B to create a sub-event underneath the loop event. And I'm going to double click to go into that. And then we'll grab our menu box object, double click, and up here under animations, we have compare frame. Let's add that. And when our frame is equal to 1, that will tell us that we're on that first frame, which is the play new game. So we can highlight this entire block, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and Control V to paste one more time. Then we can go into the second one, change that 1 to a 2. The third one, change that 1 to a 3. And I will stretch some of this out. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Hopefully you can see that better. So animation frame 1, I'm going to put in the center. That's going to be our first one created. And I want it to be positioned to the center, which is this value of this variable. So let's add an action to animation frame 1, double click our menu box object, and I am going to type in set X, and we'll insert that. And I'm just going to type in that variable, which is position center. And that makes it so much easier than having to type out the actual values. So for animation frame 2, I'm going to add an action, go into our menu box, set X, and I'm going to type in position left. And then our third one, do the same thing, set X to POS right. Okay, now if we play this, we still won't get anything because we haven't changed animation frame. It's still creating the object at animation frame 0. So our for loop up here can actually control very easily which animation frame it's on. So since we start on 1 to 3, we can just give the animation frame when it's created this loop index number. So let's go ahead and add an action to this event and go to our menu box, and we have set frame. So let's set the frame, and it's going to ask us which number we want to set it to, and I'm just going to type in loop index. So the first time this loop runs, it's going to create the object in that position, and it's going to give it the frame of 1, which is this first frame. And then the second time it runs, the loop index is going to be 2, so it'll set it to that second frame. And then the third time, it'll set it to the third frame. So let's play that. And there we go. We have 1 in the center, which is new game. Then our second frame in the object is the continue game. It's on the left, and then the settings is placed on the right. Now, because these two on the left and right were created after the first one, they were layered on top of that first one. But I want that one in the middle to be above all of these. So I'm going to exit out of that. So in animation frame 1, since it is in the center, I'm going to make it appear bigger or on top of these other two. And I'm going to do that by changing its Z elevation. So in our layout, we have X and Y, which X starts 0 on the far left side and goes to that 854 on the right. And the Y starts at 0 at the top and goes to the 480 at the bottom. So X is left to right, Y is top to bottom. The Z is the depth. So let's go back to the event sheet. And in this animation frame 1, let's add an action to that. Go get our menu box. And I'm going to type in Z elevation. And it brings up set Z elevation. And I'm going to say 35. Now when we play, it's nice and big and it looks like it's above these others. And technically it kind of is. Okay, let's exit out of that. So I'm going to need to reference this 35 and also the Z elevation of 0 multiple times throughout our code, because when we hit an arrow key to turn the carousel either left or right, those other boxes are going to need to go either back to the background or come up to the foreground. So instead of typing it in each time, I'm going to make a variable for it. So let's right click in a blank space, create a global variable, and I'm going to call this Z elevation underscore front. And then I'll right click and add another one, and I'll call this one Z elevation underscore back. When it's in the front, it's going to be this 35. So I'm going to double click Z elevation front, change the value to 35. And then Z elevation back is just going to set it back to that 0 Z elevation. So we can leave that at 0. So let's go back into this Z elevation set. and change that to the variable. And I'll type in Z elevation front. Okay, we will come back and add some to this, but for now we are done with our on start of layout initial set of events. So I'm going to right click in a blank space and add a group. And we're going to call this setup. And then I will click at the very top so it highlights all of the code we just created. And then I'll click and drag it down until it indents under that group. And that puts it in the group. And then we can just close it. So it gives us some more room and makes us a little more organized. Okay, if you have not saved this project yet, you will need to eventually. So now is a good time if you haven't. And if it's the first time you're saving it, you will have to give it a name. And this is not the project name. This is going to be a file name. Save it in a location where you know where it is and can get to. And I am going to do the same. Okay, now that we have our setup group, I'm going to right click and add another group. And I'm just going to call this one Moving Carousel. And then if we come over here to the projects panel on our object types folder, if we right click on that, we can add a new object type. And scroll down towards the bottom, we have input. I'm going to put in the keyboard. Now you can use a mouse, a touch, a gamepad, whatever you want to do for your own project. I'm going to use the arrow keys on the keyboard to kind of keep things simple. So I'm going to insert the keyboard object. So let's add an event to our moving carousel group and go get our keyboard. And I'm going to get on key pressed. And I will click to choose the left arrow key. Just press the left arrow key to select it. Hit OK, hit done. So what I want to do from here is to check where each menu box object is. So I'll drag one out just for an example here. I want to know at all times which box is in what position. So if I have, I'll drag 3 out to simulate what we would have. I'll change that one to a 3. And change that frame to a 2. So we have our new game, continue game, and settings. So I need to know what is in the position center location. Which one is in position left? Which one is in position right? Whenever I hit an arrow key and the carousel rotates, then I want to know which one is in center now, which one is at the left position now, which one is at the right position now. So these are going to change each time we hit an arrow key. Okay, I'm going to delete all those again. Go over to the event sheet, and I'm going to set up a check to check each position. So with this on keyboard left arrow pressed event here highlighted, I'm going to hit B to create a sub event under that, and then I will double click to go into it, and I'm going to go to our menu box object. I'm going to type in X, and that brings up compare X. So let's double click on compare X, and I want to know when it is equal to the very center position. And we're going to use these global variables that we created earlier because that is incredibly convenient. So I'll just type in POS center. We can highlight this, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and then paste one more time. Then we can go into the second one and double click to go into it and change POS center to POS left. And then the third one, double click to go in and change that one to POS right. So now we have 3 checks to see which one is in what position. Once we know which menu selection or which frame it's on is in what position, then we can move that box to the left or the right, depending on which key is pressed. So to get the menu box object to move, I want it to move in a very smooth process. And to do that, we have something built into construct 3 called the tween behavior. So if we click on the menu box object over here in the project panel, brings up its properties, go down to behaviors, edit behavior. Let's add a behavior and scroll down and get the tween behavior. Add that. It has no properties. We change all that in the code. So let's go to this first check, the center check. If a box is in the center position and our left arrow key is pressed, then I want that center position to move to the left. And we're going to tween the motion from the center to the left. So let's add an action, go into our object, and I'm going to type in tween, and I want tween one property. And I'm going to leave the tag blank. We don't need to reference anything. The property is going to be X. The end value is going to be the position to left of center because we're pressing the left arrow key. So the left position is going to be that global variable of POS left. And the time that it takes, I tested this out with different times and I went with 0.3 and it seemed to work pretty well. If we play this, we'll be able to check this center one. And I press the left key and it tweened it over to that X position to the POS left, which is the 327 on the X value. I can press any of the other keys, it doesn't work. That's because we no longer have any one of these objects in the center position. Before we move on from this 0.3 is going to have to be typed in several times, and we're also going to use it for more than just the speed that it tweens the X value. So instead of having to retype that several times, and if we want to change it, we would have to change it for all of the code that we write that uses that 0.3. If we put in a global variable, we will only have to change the one number and it'll change everything else in the code. So let's right click and add a global variable, and I'm going to call this move speed, and I'm going to change it to 0.3. And then we can go in here and change this to that variable of move speed. Okay, so when we play this and we press the left arrow key, it moves it to the left, but it's still big. That's because it's still at that 35 Z elevation. I want it to go to the background to be the size of these. And I want it to be a nice smooth motion, so we'll use the tween again. So we can add an action, go back into our object, and I am going to type in tween, one property, and I'm going to change the X to Z elevation. And the Z elevation, the end value is going to be this Z elevation back variable that we created. So I'll type in Z elevation back. And the time that it takes, I want it to take the same amount of time that our other tween moving it to the left takes. So it will be one smooth motion of moving it to the left and moving it back to the background position. So we'll just use the same time of that move speed variable. And then if we play, that is the effect we have. I'll reset it and do it again. So, pretty cool. Once everything else gets the correct movements and correct placements, this will look like a rotating carousel. So let's exit out of that. Seems like a good time to save if you haven't recently. Okay, let's go down here to the X position left. This is this one on the left. So if this square is here, whenever we hit left, we know the center one's going to move into the position we just saw it move in, which is this left position. I want this one to rotate over to the right. So let's set that up. Let's add an action, go into our menu box object, and I'm going to type in tween one property. The X position is going to go over to the right, which we can use that variable POS right. And the time is move speed. And if we play and I hit left, it works. So far, so good. All right, let's move on to position the right position. So we'll want this one on the right to move up to the center position. So let's add an action to that, get our box, tween one property. The X is going to go to the end value of POS center in a time of move speed. And we could play this, but we already know something's going to happen here, right? It moved to the right spot, but now it's overlapped by this one, and we want it to be bigger up in front. So we'll have to change its Z elevation like we did here. So let's add an action, go into the menu box object, tween one property, and we'll change this to Z elevation, and the end value is going to be Z elevation front, and a time of move speed. And if we play, now I hit left arrow and it rotates it. And then I can hit left again and it rotates it properly. And we can do this all day long because our positions are updating every time we hit the arrow key. Okay, so that works well with the left arrow press. Now I want to check if the right arrow is pressed. If we click right up here in this space of this event, we can highlight the entire block of code we just created, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Now we can move down here and change this left arrow to a right arrow. So now we just go in reverse of what we were doing. If the box is in the center position and we hit the right arrow key, we want it to go to the right position, so from center to right. So we can go into this tween and change it from the end value of position left to position right. And of course, if it's in the center, that means it is big. It's at that 35Z elevation. So we don't need to change this tween because it is already tweening to that back Z elevation, which is 0, because it's coming from the center position. So no need to change that. Let's go to position left. If we're on the left and we hit the right arrow key, we need to come over to the center. So let's go in here and change that from position right to position center. And then here, we're going to need to change the Z elevation because we're coming from the left, which is in the background, to that center position, which is at the Z elevation of 35. So let's add an action, go into our menu box, type in tween, one property, change the X to the Z elevation. In value is going to be Z elevation front at move speed. And then if we are in the right position, on the right side, and we hit that right, we want to rotate this one back to the other side, which will be position left. So let's change that tween from position center to position left. And since it's already in the background at 0 by that time, we don't need to tween its Z elevation, so we can just delete that one. Okay, let's play this. And there's left, and if I go right, everything carousels the way that it is supposed to. So this is essentially the mechanic. There is one other little failsafe we need to put in. If I start spamming the left and right arrow keys, I don't know if, oh, there we go. I got it to do it. Sometimes if you're really fast, it will mess things up. And then you press it a couple times and it goes back. We can avoid that from happening at all by changing a couple of little things. The reason it's doing that is because when we press a left or right, it's running these tween actions, and when we press it fast enough, it starts a new tween and it moves it before this one is done. So to make sure that that doesn't happen, we can make sure that it only runs once. So up here under left pressed, let's highlight this block of code, this first X equals position center, hit B to create a sub event. I'm going to double click to go into that sub event, system, type in trigger once while true, and then I'm going to highlight both of these tween actions and move them into that event. So now once it checks to see what's in that position, it will only run the code once. So I'm going to highlight this one and do the same thing, B to get a sub event, double click to go into it, get system, trigger once while true. A little trick we can do now that we have that created, we can click in this space off to the left of it to highlight the whole thing. And if you hold Control on your keyboard and then click and drag that whole event down and then move it to the right until it indents under that next event. So we just created another trigger once while true sub event. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of these down here. I'm going to make sure that's all highlighted. Control, click, drag, indent. And then Control, click, drag, indent. And then one last time, Control, click, drag, indent. So now we can go back up here and make sure that all of our tweens are in a trigger once while true event. Make sure we move all of them in. We don't want any of them left in the initial check. Highlight all the actions and just click and drag them into the trigger once while true. Okay. Another thing that we should put in our code here is to make sure that we cannot press this arrow key more than once while the carousel is moving. So to do this, we're going to just right click in an empty space, maybe up here towards the top, and add a global variable. And I'm going to call this is moving. And I'm going to change the type to a Boolean, and it's going to start off as false. When we press a left or right arrow key, the carousel moves. We can go ahead and make sure that that variable is true. It says that it is moving. So let's do that. On left pressed, let's add an action to that. Go into System. I'm going to type in Boolean, set Boolean is moving to true. And then I will control click and drag a copy of that down here to our on right key pressed. So once we set that to true, then I don't want any of this to be able to take place again until it is turned false. So if we right click on this very top event, we can add insert above. And I'm going to go into System and I'm going to type in Boolean, and it says is Boolean set, is moving, and I hit done. And what this says is moving true. Well, I only want this to be able to take place if it's not moving. So let's highlight just the is moving check and hit I on the keyboard. It puts that X next to it. That means it inverts it, which says this Boolean variable is now false. So since I want this to take place first, this check, I need to move all of this into a sub-event of this check. So let's click on this block of code so it highlights the whole on left arrow pressed event, and click and drag it till it indents right under that check. So you should have your is moving Boolean variable check, and then a sub-event of our left pressed check, and then a sub-event of the rest of these position checks. We'll need to do the same thing for our on right check because it is now flush with this. It is no longer a sub-event of anything. So let's click and drag it, and we're going to have to drag it all the way to the top here and move it till that line is indented once under that Boolean variable check. And these can be in any order, so it's now we're checking if the right arrow key is pressed first, and then this one is down here. And it's not actually in order. It's going to check it all at the same time. So as long as these are indented the same amount, and they are, then we are good to go. We just need to make sure that they are sub-events of this Boolean check. And if you click on that to highlight it, it should highlight all of the code that we have made. So we have set a way to where we can check that if we press an arrow key, we set it to true. That way, this is no longer true. We can't run these tweens over and over again. So we set the variable to true. We need a way to set it for false. So let's scroll down to the end and where it says add an event to the moving carousel group. Let's click on that. And we're going to go grab our menu box object. And I'm going to type in tween, and I'm going to select is any tween playing. So if any tween is playing, that means the carousel is moving. But if all the tweens are done and the carousel has stopped moving, then this is moving true variable can be set to false. So let's change this, highlight just this part of the event, and hit I on the keyboard to invert it. So now it says as long as no tweens are playing, then we can set that variable to false. So add an action, go into System, type in Boolean, set Boolean is moving to false. Okay. Now if we play, everything still works the same, and if I spam it as much as I can, there's no chance it's not going to take effect. The carousel is not going to move. All that code's not going to take effect until the carousel stops moving. So there's a couple of fail-safe checks to make sure that people can't break your menu carousel mechanic. All right, one last little thing I want to do. It's an effect. In the original project that I showed you at the beginning of this video, I grayed out the two selections on the back row. When the carousel spins, if it's not front and center, we kind of take the focus off of the other two selections. This is super easy to do. So I am going to close our moving carousel group, and I'm going to right click and add another group. And I'm going to call this one grayscale and selection. So we're going to gray out those back two selections, but while our box in front is in focus, I want this frame to flash so that it shows us that that's what we are selecting. Come over to the layout, and actually let's go over to menu box and right click on it and clone. This creates a whole new object, menu box 2. I am going to highlight it and change it to menu box frame. And then I'm going to click and drag a copy of it out onto our layout so we can see what's going on here. And I'm going to double click to go into it. right click on this first empty frame and delete it. And then I'll click on the last frame and delete it as well. Okay, we can get our eyedropper tool and get this green color, and then get our paint bucket tool. And if you have flood fill checked, it will fill each individual letter. But if you uncheck it, it's going to fill everything of that color. So we can just click on one black part and it fills all of it with green. Then we can click on this other frame and do the same thing. Now if this paint bucket's still selected, we can come down here to the alpha, highlight it, type in 0, and it makes transparency. And I'm going to click in the green area and it gets rid of the green. And do the same thing for the other frame. Now with this second frame selected, I'm going to get the eyedropper tool again and select the orange color. And I'm going to take the illumination up pretty high, something like that. You can just eyeball it and then get the paint bucket tool and fill that in. And then if we click on this animation 1 up here, it brings up its properties. We want to make sure that loop is selected, and I'm going to change the speed to 12. And if we hit this play icon up here, it shows us a preview of our animation. And there it is. It blinks. All right. I'm going to exit out of that. And with that selected, I'm just going to hit delete and get rid of it. So let's go back over to our event sheet. So I want to create that just like we did the menu boxes on the start of our layout. Up here in the first event check on start of layout, I'm going to go ahead and create that one single object. So add an action, go into system and create object. We will click to choose our menu box frame, hit OK. The layer is going to be menu boxes, and the X will be in the center because we want that center position, so we can just use that variable POS center. And then the Y height, we'll just do what we did with the original placement of the menu boxes, which was layout height divided by 2. If we do that, we still have a problem. If I play, it creates it. We can't see it because it's at the 0 Z height and it's sitting way back there, hidden by everything else. So we can add an action here, go to our menu box frame. Once we've created it, we can change its Z elevation. So type in Z elevation, and it is that Z elevation front. And we still have a problem here. If I play, you don't see it. That's because it was created first, and then these boxes were created on top of it. And if I move the carousel, you see it. It is now on top of everything because these are changing their Z height and their layers are going to the back. But I don't want that. I want it to be on top from the very beginning. So what we can actually do is come in here to Z elevation front and say plus 0.1. And what that will do is it'll put it 0.1 of Z elevation unit above the others. So there's no weird overlapping. Now we do have the issue that the frame is still there when the boxes move into place. And I want it to appear as if the box starts blinking once it gets into that position. So let's exit out of that. And I'm going to close our setup group for now and come over here to our grayscale and selection group, add an event to that. And I'm going to check our menu box object. And I am going to type in X and compare X. And if it is equal to that position center variable, then I want to be able to see it. So we'll add an action, go to our frame, and type in visible, set visible to visible. And then if we highlight this whole block of code and press X, it gives us an else statement, meaning if a box is not in that position center, then we can set it invisible. So I'm going to add an action to this else statement, get our frame, type in visible, and I want to change that to invisible. So now if we play, when I hit an arrow key, it disappears until a box moves into that center position. Now let's move on to making it grayed out when it's in the background. To do this, we're going to need to give the object an effect. So let's click on our menu box object in the project panel and go over to the properties, and it says edit effects. Let's add a new effect, and I'm going to type in grayscale, Gray, and let's double click on that to add it. We can exit out of that. And if we go to the layout and we click on this, you see we can't see the properties of grayscale. If we have it in the game or in the layout, then it lets us see its properties. By default, it is at 100%. That doesn't really matter. We're going to change it in code, so we don't need to worry about the properties. And if I click off to the side, you can see the whole thing is gray. So I'm going to delete that again. Just wanted to cover that really quick. So up here in our X position center check, we set our menu box frame to visible. We can also make sure that this is in full color. So to do that, we need to make sure that we tell the grayscale to have a value of 0. So let's add an action to this event, go into our menu box, and scroll down to set effect parameter. Let's click on that. And in between the quotation marks, we're going to need to type the name of the effect. And the default name of the effect is grayscale, Grayscale, with the G capitalized. So capital G, Rayscale, in between the quotation marks. And it has to be case sensitive and in between quotation marks, or it won't reference it. So the parameter index is 0 because the very first parameter starts at 0 and there was only one parameter, so that is 0. And then the value is also going to be 0. So let's hit done. And then down here in our else, we can just turn that to its full power. So I'm actually going to highlight this grayscale parameter action and control click, drag out a copy, and then we can double click to go into it and change the value from 0 to 100. So if we play this, nothing happens because we didn't tell anything to happen until other things are checked. So if I hit an arrow key, then everything takes place. And then you can see each time I hit the arrow key, the grayscale takes effect until a box moves into that center position. Now, I have an issue with this. I don't like it staying gray until it gets to that stopped center position. I want the next box moving into that position to turn full color halfway through the motion. And then the one that is in the center turn gray halfway through its motion. So let's exit out of that. To do this, we're going to check the Z elevation of the box to tell where it is in its motion. So since we give it a grayscale of 100% in this else statement, I'm going to do all of that here. So let's highlight this whole else statement, press B to get a sub-event, and then double click to go into that sub-event, and let's check the Z elevation of our menu box. So get our menu box object, type in Z elevation, compare Z elevation, and when it is equal to, and we have this Z elevation front, we know it's 35. So half of that would be 17.5. I'm just going to go 17. There's not going to be much difference between 17 and 17.5. And then I want to know if it is actually less than 17. So if our Z elevation is less than 17, that means it's towards the back. That's when I want this to be gray. So I'm going to move this action down into that spot. And then whenever it's greater than that 17 Z elevation, I want this to be 0, so everything is in color. So let's highlight this block, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Then we can go into this event, change less than to greater than, and then change our grayscale parameter value to 0. And we still have one issue. I'll show you. When we start, these guys back here are still in full color, but once we press a button, we now have, it's subtle, but you can see that it stays full color till it gets all the way to the back, and those that are gray moving to the front are gray until about halfway, then it turns full color. And what's happening is one is going to grayscale when the other one is coming out of the grayscale. So now the issue of how it starts out, and we can take care of that in the setup. So when we create these 3 boxes, our animation frame 1 is in position center. The other 2 are in position left and right, which are on that back row. So for animation frame 2, let's add an action, go into menu box, and scroll down to set parameter effect. In between quotation marks, capital G, Rayscale, and the value to 100. And then with that highlighted, we can control click, drag a copy down to animation 3 and push play. And now it starts out the way that it's supposed to. And everything seems to be working out just fine. If this is something you're looking for, we can actually set up one more thing down here in our grayscale and selection. Under our X position center check, before we go into our else statement, with this highlighted, we can push B to create another sub event. And this time I'm going to go in and set an event with the keyboard and on key pressed. And I'm going to choose the space key. And this is just a rough example to show. So let's come over here to the layouts, and I'm going to right click on the layout folder and add a layout. Just the layout only for now, layout 2, and then I'm going to do it one more time. So we have layout 2 and layout 3. Let's say I'll call this settings, and then I'll change layer 3 to continue. On settings, we can highlight our layer 0 here. I'm going to come over here to appearance, and I'm going to change the background color to just like a red color, something like that. That's for our settings. And then for continue, I will get that layer 0, change the background color to something like that, just something obnoxious. And then we'll actually need a third layer or a third layout. So let's add one more and add layout only. And I'm going to call this one new game. And then I'll check the layer, go to background color, and I'll do like that. Color does not matter. So up here, our layout 1 is our original layout. We want to make sure that is the last layout selected before we play anything. And I'm going to rename layout 1 to menu. So now over in our event sheet, when we have a menu box in the center position, now we can determine which frame it is on so that we know which layout we want to go to. And to do that, we're going to reference a key, and I'll do that right now. So let's highlight this block of code before the else statement, press B to create a sub event, and let's double click to go into it. And let's get our keyboard object on key pressed, and I'm going to choose the space key. Once we have a box in the middle, and then we press the space key. So with that all selected, let's press B again to create another sub event. And we'll go in here and we'll start checking to see what frame it's on. So menu box and compare frame. And I'm going to say is equal to 1. And then I'll highlight all of that. Control C to copy, Control V to paste, Control V to paste one more time. Then we can go into the second one, double click, go into it, change that to a 2. Go into the third one, change that to a 3. So now we can tell it what to do once we press the space key, depending on what frame is showing. So let's open this back up. Play new game is 1, continue is 2, settings is 3. Okay, so in 1, let's add an action, go into system, and I'm going to type in go to layout. And I'm going to pick new game. Hit done. And then we can actually just control click, drag a copy of that down into each one of these. And let's go into the second one. And we said animation frame 2 was continue. And then down here in 3, we can change that to settings. Now, when we play, we can rotate our carousel. And if we pick settings and hit spacebar, we go to our red screen that we created. That is settings. So continue was green, new game was yellow. Let's go back to our menu layout and hit play. And then we can choose a different one. Let's choose continue. There's the green. I'll reset it. And let's go to new game, which is yellow. Okay. So that's how you would set that up. And that is how you can easily create a rotating carousel menu of selections. You know, I just like to take a long time to explain things in my videos, but these are actually really quick solutions to add just a little bit of flair to a prototype or a game jam game, or to plug in a new idea to a project you might be working on. All right, I have a couple other menu ideas. If you have anything you'd like to suggest, let me know down in the comments. That is going to do it for this video. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, please hit that big red button, click that bell, and hit that thumbs up while you're at it. I always appreciate your support. That's going to do it for me this round. Stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video.